Smart 24, driving business.
Good afternoon once again. It is the Thursday that we come your way with Fat Talks here on Smart 24. We are live on Smart 24 TV, but we are also live on our X Spaces. Well, most of you are still used to Twitter Spaces, but it is X Spaces now. So if you can go to our, social media, that is particularly Twitter or X, and look for Fidelis Leadership Institute, find us and join us in this space. I see people joining us. Please tell your friends to tell their friends and other friends to join us as we delve into a very interesting conversation today here on Smart 24, but also on our Fat Talks that come your way every other Thursday, 4 p.m. And I'm very delighted this afternoon we are going to be speaking driving ethical and servant leadership from the board. And you know very well from Fidelis Leadership Institute, we are all about ethics. We speak being faithful, being available, and being teachable. These are what drive us at Fidelis Leadership Institute. So we, in our weekly spaces, we get to sit down with people we think have made a change or continue to, ethically transform our societies, communities, our homes, even the spaces we occupy. So today we have a gentleman that we're going to speak to shortly, and we are speaking driving ethical and servant leadership from the board. Now, he is with us this afternoon. He is called Mr. Richard Mugisha. He's a lawyer and senior partner, Trust Law Chambers, Kigali, Rwanda, a firm he founded in 2004. Prior to that, he was manager, procurement policy and legal affairs at the National Tender Board. And in the academic domain, he's taught and conducted tutorials at the National University of Rwanda and the Kigali Institute of Science and Technology. Mr. Richard Mugisha is not just that. He is a former president of the East Africa Law Society and a former chairman of the Business Law Reform Commission of Rwanda. Interestingly, from what I have found out is that Richard Mugisha was born in Uganda. He will tell us about that. He has also served on several boards of foundations and companies. He currently serves as chairman of Ecobank Rwanda, chairman Airtel Rwanda, and a board member at the Africa Leadership University. Yes, he is also the honorary consul of the Republic of Lithuania to the Republic of Rwanda. Yes, Mr. Richard Mugisha, murakaze neza, turabishimiye. I had to learn that.
Murakoze cyane, very nice to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you, Richard. First and foremost, you share a name with my father, so I'm very honored and very glad that, but both names, interestingly. And so I'm very humbled that I'm having you this afternoon.
Oh, really? Well, what a coincidence,
Absolutely. Yes. So Richard, I am told I'm fully informed that you were born in Uganda. Tell us a little bit about that and how you end up in Rwanda.
Well, if you know a bit about the history of this country, you will probably know that from the late 50s, there was a massive exodus of Rwandan refugees that fled to neighboring countries, including Uganda. So I was born to refugee parents in Uganda. I was born in a place called Bugerere, where my father was teaching French in a school called St. Kalemba. And I left Uganda when I was 20 years old and went to study in Southern Africa and then returned home in 1995. Home as in Rwanda, yeah.
That's really amazing. That's beautiful. Bugerere. You people, if you know Bugerere, that's where our guest today was born, and we're glad to have you, Richard, once again. So we are with Fidelis Leadership Institute is all about ethical and creating a critical mass of ethical leaders in Africa. Our vision is very huge, but when we sit here with people like you who've transformed societies and who continue to impact those around us, we want to learn, we want to engage, we want to understand how you have made it and how you continue to make it in that area. Therefore, that is what actually informs our conversation today, driving ethical and servant leadership from the board. But to start with, Richard, what do ethics to you, in so far the journey you've had, what is ethics to you? And when it comes to leadership, why should anybody be bothered by how ethical they are or what ethics they present in their leadership?
Well, I mean, ethics, to begin with, moral foundations of what is right and wrong. And these are things which are kind of innate in human beings. We all know what's right and we know what's wrong. And the fact that we don't always do the right thing means that adhering to ethics and making them part of what you do on a daily basis requires continuous effort. At a board level, it's very important to make sure that the ethics and the values derived from those ethics indeed form part of the DNA of any organization. That is the only way to ensure sustainability of any organization. It's the only way to ensure that it maximizes the objectives for which organizations have been established and for the interest of multiple stakeholders. So it's thankfully most boards will always have this codified in various instruments that guide the company. You will have board charters, you will have... I'm losing you, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm trying to understand because the people we have on our spaces and on Smart 24 might not actually have the privilege to be on these boards, but I know they look forward to that point. I'm really curious about your view on ethics and why it is important for anybody, regardless of what position they are in or they're at. What is that view, your view, particular view on ethics?
My particular view on ethics is that they are indispensable if you are going to have a sustained growth of any organization. And let nobody tell you that it's easy to stick to ethics. Ethics require that whether it's in your personal life or in a leadership position, it requires that you must remain alert and vigilant, because there is always pitfalls in your way that can lead to deviation from what you know to be right But for a host of other reasons, notably self-interest, you could, be derailed. And that is not good, not only for you as a leader, but even for the organization that you. And so, yes, most of us really know what ethics are. We know what is morally right and what is morally wrong. We know that it's important to be honest. It's important to be trustworthy. It's important to be a person of integrity. But the reason why we sometimes may fall off are so strong, and put it differently, that is the enemy you have to fight on a daily basis. Does that answer your question? I hope.
Do answer that perfectly, because I think we all ride on ethics in every single thing we do in our day-to-day lives. Ethics is what drives us. But if we're not aware, some of us are not aware that I am quite transparent. Maybe I have integrity, and we do not really pay attention to those. But I think ethics are what drive society, and you've clearly put it, and it answers that question. So with ethics, as we grow into important people in our societies, Richard, we realize that in your case, for example, you are a part of you belong to many boards, and you have held leadership positions for a while. The question is now, how does ethical leadership from the board of directors, in your view right now, impact the overall organizational culture? Because if there's an organization, oftentimes the people at the board, the people who are heading these organizations, oftentimes the link between them and the ones they lead oftentimes is not that close. And so they view you from a certain point, but how do you view, and how do your ethics impact organizational culture?
Well, I mean, assuming leadership positions at the board level is a very important responsibility. Of course, it is a privilege, but as with every privilege comes a huge responsibility. And you have to be deliberate about especially leading by example. If you lead by example, that is a very important first step to making sure that everyone else is going to follow suit. You also have to be able to communicate effectively what the values of the organizations are, so that this becomes cascaded from the board level downwards. And it's also critical that a culture that bridges the gap between the top leadership and everyone else is closed, so that everyone knows that we are in this together, and this is who we are. This is the DNA of our organization, and you can only be part of this team if you stick to this, and let it be something that cuts across everything we do. How we make the decisions, how we serve our customers, how we treat our employees, and let it just be something that is like defines us as an organization. And for you to be able to do that, you have to close the gap between, you can't go to everyone, but hopefully if you are close enough to the next tier, then the next tier will also be close to the ones they lead, and the chain reaction will go on to make sure that everybody is impacted in a positive way.
And that brings me to another question. Oftentimes the boards sit and come up with code of conduct, come up with the ethical standards of the organization, and in so doing, here oftentimes I question myself and I'm asking, so how the people setting these codes of conduct, these ethical standards, do they look within? Do they take some time to look within and see if we're setting a certain standard? Do I subscribe to that same standard? Or is it just sitting down and saying, okay, fine, we need integrity, we need blah, 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 honesty and ABCD? Is it a moment of reflection for the board? Do they sit down and say, okay, so you and I believe in ABCD, Richard is like this, so-and-so is like this. So what do we want this organization to be? Is it from an honest point of view, or is it just, normal standards?
Like I said earlier, generally we all know what is right and what is wrong. Like, you don't have to labor too much to explain to anyone that being honest is the right thing to do in everything you do. But more often than not, dishonesty sets in. And so the conversation needs to be, what is it that we must do to make sure that we stick to being honest? That we continuously earn the trust of the people we lead, we continuously earn the trust of our customers, and by extension, that becomes what we all live by in our work. Now, let me just give you an example. Many senior executives will make very generous packages for board members. And you always need to be very alert to see what is that package likely to bring about. Because without you being careful, that could begin the process of you being compromised. And you start tolerating the very same things that you have agreed should guide the organization. And so it's, like I said, you have an enemy in front of you that you must fight every day. Even when it's inconvenient to do so. Yeah. And this is a conversation that must be ongoing all the time. Because it's very easy to become unconscious of that. And the minute that sets in, we've seen so many organizations being brought down by just one simple mistake. And I think it probably came from that inability to make sure that as a board you're holding each other accountable. As a board you're making sure that, yes, you must be remunerated for what you do, but don't get to a position where you are served a meal on a poison chalice, and then you lose the moral authority to hold the ones below accountable.
Absolutely. And Richard, at what point does this saying come in, lead by example? If you're at the board level, first of all, you're in a position of privilege, is what overall people say. Two, you are a boss, and so you're setting certain expectations of your employees. And so the question here is, at what point do you lead by example?
Yeah, so again, I'll probably give you another example, which happened at one of the boards that I was part of. Some colleagues were warming up to the idea of getting a percentage of profit after tax, the same way top executives of a company will. Now, because as a board, one of the core responsibilities is to always take a long-term view of the organization. And that may not always be reflected in the bottom line of each financial year. If you aspire to have a good talent pool in your organization, you're going to have to invest a lot in training. Now, training doesn't necessarily give you a bottom line immediately. It is important. It ensures long-term sustainability of the organization. Now, if you are not careful, and as a board you end up accepting that you also will be getting a percentage of profit after tax, you're already in a compromised position, because then you are necessarily going to compromise as well the imperatives of the organization to protect its long-term sustainability.
And clear. So Richard, we are at the board level and we are speaking ethical leadership and servant leadership, and we know oftentimes, because we're human beings, that's one. Two, we get compromised. I mean, anything can happen, and you've already alluded to that in that example. So in what ways do we encounter ethical lapses, and what common ethical lapses do you encounter, apart from the examples you've given us?
I mean, like, it is usually it's about how you manage the resources. If there are lapses around the rules that have been agreed upon on how resources of the organization that have been put under your trust are being managed, that's a common lapse. Something else that is common is about favoritism, creating a breeding ground where some people will be favored regardless of whether they're doing the right thing or not. Because when everybody perceives you as not fair, that you favor some people over the other, then it's very difficult to stick to ethical principles. Then that also extends to things like, how do you hire your employees? If you've agreed that you're always going to be hiring employees on merit, now it doesn't make sense that then the chairman starts writing notes to HR managers and CEOs that you should hire so and so because I've said so. So you just imagine what happens then if they actually hire that individual. will you now be able to hold them accountable if they also hire their own friends or relatives? So you have to make sure that you are guarding your moral authority jealously, because that is the only way you're going to be leading by example and making sure that you do not fall off. So it's on aspects like those that you're likely to drop the ball.
How do you mitigate these issues, these lapses?
I mean, you mitigate those lapses by encouraging a culture of holding each other accountable. Whether you're a chairman, you have to create the space for others to hold you accountable. I do find that is the most important way of doing it. It's also important to have refreshers to also understand how have other leaders fallen. People who were otherwise very successful and probably stuck to ethical leadership for a long time, but then they fell. Because we are all human, it can happen to anyone. I think the biggest mistake many people make is to think this one doesn't apply to me. I'm like, I am very upright, I have mastered it all. Such conduct can never come to me. That's a very, very clear way of self-deception, because it can definitely happen to you. And if you do not have that culture of others holding you accountable, it's a very dangerous path.
Of those hardest commodities to come across in Africa, and particularly in our East African region. Most of our leaders are always, evading accountability, and when they're pointed at in issues of accountability, they will disappear or something will come up, and then somehow it is swept under the rug. Not what point, but how do I, let myself be held accountable, because I'm a leader and I am looking at I don't want to fall short, but then I have to be accountable. There's that conflict. How do you address it?
So I'll tell you what I practice in my various roles, particularly when I am the chair. It's important to make sure that there is room to talk about everything. Like, there should be no taboo in the boardroom. Like, everything can be discussed, and people will have different views. Let them be discussed. That's the only way you encourage everyone to know that if they think, I think you are falling off the rail, then they can say that, The other thing is, usually it's important that as you discuss, as you conduct your board meetings, let the executives also be at the table, and let them also be encouraged to state what they think, even though they are not members of the board, because their views are also important. And probably that is where your salvation may come when you're falling off the rail. Yeah.
It's still one of those things that is hard to, do, but I'm glad we have the likes of you, and I'm sure there are others like you who make sure that accountability is key. So, Richard, here at FAT Talks, we often ask a very interesting question. to most of our guests, and we ask you today, what is that one, two, or three truths about you, or lies about you, or untruth about you? What do people know you for? What do people think of you that is true or that is false?
Wow, that's a tough one. I think the one thing that I know for sure is true about me is that I am happiest when I'm in service of others, and it's been something I didn't know, but through checking in on myself on a regular basis, I did find that the one thing that makes me happiest is when I'm in the service of someone else or many others. And I have been encouraging many people to do that exercise because I believe that is something that maybe we all share as human beings, but we just don't know. Some people think that I have gotten to where I am because I'm an outstanding person, but I just think that's a pure lie. I've just been lucky.
Note of that. So we're speaking ethical and servant leadership. Do these two complement each other?
Yes, they certainly do complement each other. Because ethical leadership, you could say, is narrower because it's literally about a particular organization looked at in a very narrow sense. You could be an ethical leader just because you know it's going to benefit you and your organization. But servant leadership does broaden it in the sense that you now recognize that there are many more stakeholders that need to be served. The second thing is that as a servant leader, it's definitely not about you. It's about everyone else you lead and then the other stakeholders for whom you are responsible. So they do complement each other. And I think you cannot be a servant leader without being ethically upright. I do think you could be, you can lead with ethics without necessarily being a servant leader.
Right. This sounds good
So
indeed. So I'm looking at a scenario where you are a servant leader without ethics. I don't think you can even qualify for anything if you do not have ethics, because I think it is your ethical values that drive people around you, that bring people to you, or that makes you who you are. And this brings me back to what you just said, outstanding leaders. So you might actually be, because of what you believe in. And let's break a little bit from these questions a little bit. What is your ideology in life?
I mean, I do firmly believe that, the interests of any individual or organization are best reflected in the wider interests of everyone else. And many of the things that I do are influenced by that ideology.
Why? Why? Because most leaders are selfish. Yeah, they're selfish. They want to quickly get what they can for themselves. But you are considering the other people around you as a leader. Why?
Actually, that is also self-interest. Only it is enlightened self-interest.
Okay, very interesting there. So Richard, at the board level, and you've already explained to us that ethical leadership and servant leadership complement each other and definitely go hand in hand. But how hard is it to implement these two? While incorporating them in say, for example, an organization's strategic plan, and also implementing them at the organizational level, how challenging is that, or how simple is that?
I think it's not easy. I mean, definitely not easy, but it's worth every effort. And I say this because as a leader, you have to literally forget about yourself and make sure that you are making yourself available to others. And the interests of others supersede your own interests. And I mean, having said that, though, I also know that it's probably the most gratifying thing to be able to avail yourself of others, to be able to listen to them, to make sure you understand what their challenges are, discussing with them how they can be addressed, ensuring that they are also understand that what their obligations are, making sure that you are protecting their rights. I think probably one of the things that I relate most with that, what do they call it in communication terms? That FAT thing is the availability.
It's an ideology. It's
Yes.
what we live by as what drives us here at Fidelis Leadership Institute.
Yeah. So availability to the people you lead is very important. And given that one of the cornerstones of leadership is leading by example, is that if you are available, then you are also going to be approachable. But many of these attributes are also contagious. They will cascade to the rest of the team, and over time, they do become form part of the DNA of the organization.
Wow. I see time is onto us, but we are still doing okay. So Richard, we get to a point where we want to understand at the board level, when we are saying that we are driving ethical and servant leadership from the board, it means that the board has quite a lot to offer out there in terms of ethics, in terms of servant leadership. How do the boards communicate their efforts and progress in areas of servant and ethical leadership? Do you sit down and have meetings with stakeholders? Do you get employees of the organization and perhaps take them through trainings? How do you go about that? How do you effectively communicate?
So you have to do it through a multi-pronged approach. Like I said earlier, effective communication is important, but so is training to make sure that people actually understand. And it's also important for people to know that the values the organization stands for obviously derived from the moral foundations of ethics are not an end in themselves. So many businesses, especially as they begin to grow in size, cease to be just a business, rather the concern of just the owners of the capital. There's so many other people that will be let down if the organization does not succeed. And so some of those ideas can only be appreciated through specialized training to enable everybody to come on board. One of the other things that I fully subscribe to is that every employee in any organization is important, regardless of where they stand. And so involvement of everyone is essential, so that even the person who is serving your tea or supporting you otherwise should know that they are important, and they should know to a level that they can appreciate everything that everybody knows. Yeah.
Key takeaway for me there is every employee is important regardless of where they stand. And I think it is one of those things that most organizations lack. And allow me fault some of them because oftentimes they don't care for the tea girl, they don't care for the gender, they don't care. They see them as, whatever, they move on. And I think if you're to be such a servant leader, you must be able to take care of every other employee regardless. And I think I like that. So the concept of ethical and servant leadership has evolved over time, and I think you will agree with me. We have seen changes. People have come to uphold certain ethics, or actually take on different. Like you said, it is contagious. Some have picked on from others, and so how do boards, for example, in your case, how do you stay? How do you evolve with the ever-changing world, and how do you embrace new concepts that come your way?
So, like I said earlier, being knowledgeable is important, and this can take various forms. You could do formal trainings. You could identify a coach. You could of course, you must read. That's a given. And where you are able, actually discuss live examples of scandals, because I guess that's the best teacher. Yeah.
So as evolves, as new trends come, as artificial intelligence takes over, and of course that also tweaks our humanity and changes our way of thinking. Still, do you believe it just still goes back to communication, to being open to each other? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, where AI takes us in the future, I mean, your guess is as good as mine. But I firmly believe that our needs as human beings are going to remain the same, regardless of technological advancements. And how we relate with each other may differ, but at the core of us will remain the same. And so what may change is how this interaction is actually delivered. But as for that being a key factor in ensuring that we stay on course, I don't see that changing. But probably there could be more efficient ways of doing it. There could be, that one I don't know. These things develop so quickly. Yeah, but I think you can't do away with communication. You can't do away with human interaction. You can't do away with being available to your teams in whatever form it is, so that you can influence them positively.
This takes me back to where we started from a little bit, on the different leadership approaches that boards employ, to keep the organization moving. And so in the face of all this, what interesting strategies can boards employ, to effectively, enhance their leadership approaches?
Well, I think the one that I find most effective is to try and understand what the people you lead also think, and to always ask those questions from the people you lead, but also to encourage every member of the board to also ask themselves questions, have conversations with themselves. I was at an event sometime earlier this year, and we were all charged about an organization that was portraying itself as an organization that honors employees and protects workers' rights, but was actually doing the exact opposite of that, exploiting people just because they were not in America, but on the continent here in Africa. And so everybody had something to say condemning that organization. And I did feel very, very compelled to ask the question, before we condemn these companies, why don't we also ask ourselves, how do we treat our domestic workers at home? How do we treat our drivers? Are we giving them a minimum wage. We are complaining about this organization. Are we giving our domestic employees a minimum wage? Do we think twice as we are enjoying a meal at a restaurant that our driver needs to eat as well? How do we treat them? Because when you don't have conversations with yourself,
Smart 24, driving business.
you are not looking inward. And so, to get back to what you did ask, I think it's important to know what the people you lead think, and that can only happen through engagement with them. But you also have to check in with yourself to see, are these things that I value? Do I actually, practice them in my own backyard? Because chances are that if you see those people as less of human beings, you probably are going to see some other people as less of human beings, and you will do the wrong thing.
Home, really. I think there's a common saying that says that integrity means you're, let me see if I can put it together, being able to do the right thing even when no one is watching. And I think that reminds us of the fact that in as much as we are leaders, okay, fine, we might we come off as being able to do good things, but are we still able to do the same things when no one is watching? So that when the time for accountability comes, you are confident and you can actually vouch for your own self and say, well, I couldn't do this, I did the right thing. So that really hits home. And so here, Richard, at Fidelis Leadership Institute, we carry out executive coaching. And executive coaching means that we are, looking at for board members and leaders, and we try to sit down and, retool them, remind them that, you're leaders and you've got to be ethical. And because we believe in ethical and servant leadership, we try to take them through that. But the question for you here, Richard, is what is the role of board education and development in especially fostering a better understanding of ethical and servant leadership?
No, I mean, the board education and development is indispensable. You can't be an effective board member without constantly retooling yourself, both in terms of understanding your business properly, understanding what the emerging trends are, because whenever you have emerging trends, it's like, when people go to church every Sunday, they are probably listening to these sermons over and over again. And scripture is the same. But it's important to emphasize these things, because you left our own devices, I think many of us could do wrong things. And so that education, particularly if it's shared and people are undergoing the education and development together, listening to perspectives that others have, and sharing is very, very important. It keeps you up to date. It allows you to question where you are in your journey as a leader. And it's also important for everyone to know that indeed leadership is a journey. You never get to a point where you say, I think I know it all, it's all done. You have to make sure that you are growing every day, because you can never be a perfect leader.
At any point. And it would be a lie if anybody said somebody is perfect and there's a perfect leader. So there's need for continuous education and development. And I don't think it's only for board people or board leaders or board chairs and the rest. I think every one of us needs to focus on continuous education and development, because it is very important in as much as we move ahead in life. So, Richard, we're nearing the closure of our conversation, and there's lots of interesting nuggets I've picked from you, and I will come to that a little bit later. But let's look at potential long-term benefits. For example, for an organization, what would it experience in fostering a strong ethical and servant leadership culture from the board down? So if you're focusing on fostering ethical and servant leadership at the board level, how do you cascade it to those you're leading?
Well, I mean, if you're providing ethical and servant leadership, you also need to be able to measure how well you're doing. And you can't be your own judge. And it's always going to be reflected through the various people that you serve. And so, you know if you're succeeding when you've got satisfied customers, they trust your brand, they can vouch for it. You know if you're succeeding if you've got loyal employees who feel happy to be part of a great team. You know if you're succeeding if you never have crises of leadership changes at the senior leadership level. So those are the benefits that eventually. Also, you measure if you have more disciples that are spreading the same message, both in terms of words and deeds. And that necessarily shouldn't mean that you should stop there, but it is a cause for celebrating that you are making an impact, and also re-energizes you to do more. Because like I said, this is something that never stops. You have to remain vigilant every day.
Interesting nuggets, lots of them. I think it would be another show for us if we were to go through what actually we have picked here from Smart 24 and of course at FAT Talks. I could go through a little bit, and maybe if there's one that you highlighted where you said that every employee is important regardless of where they stand. Two, where you mentioned that we need to think about the people that work for us. For example, drivers, our housemaids, our housekeepers, and the like. And think about them for a minute, be in their shoes for a minute. And it reminded me of, there was a moment here in Uganda when we had some employees of a certain minister, an employee actually shot him and he died sadly. So the conversation around that, erupted across the country of how we treat our drivers, how we treat our security guards, how we treat our housekeepers, and the like. And this reminds me of us coming back to review our own ethics, sit down with ourselves to understand how do I want to be treated? And can I do the same for the other person? And for me, it's the greatest lesson today. And I hope that people out there, the ones who've joined us on our Twitter Spaces, the ones who've been watching here on Fat Talks, I hope you took that home and you remember to do that, because we are all human and we deserve to be treated as well as everyone else. So in conclusion, Richard, conclusively, what is your conclusive remarks, as we call it a day here?
Well, my concluding remarks would be that you're doing a very good job. This is a very noble cause, because leadership is the cause, and everything else is effect. So and given that you are devoting lots of time and resources to developing leaders, I believe that's the most important thing we lack, generally speaking, and I can only encourage you to do more. And so I thank you for what you do, and keep going.
Away from Kigali, Rwanda. And he told you earlier he was born here in Uganda, in Bulgaria. Very interesting to know. And Richard, we thank you so much for your time and for your interesting and educative nuggets you've shared with us. We like to have more conversations that change the people around us. That because what you've said, leadership is very important, and we need to focus on it. If it is not focused on, then the people who are being led suffer. And so we really thank you for your time. Thank you for watching Smart 24. Those of you who are on TV, we're also live on YouTube. On our social platforms, Fidelis Leadership Institute, Smart 24, on YouTube. Find this conversation if you missed it in case. And be reminded that at Fidelis Leadership Institute, we carry out the FAT Fellowship, and this targets everybody that is interested in being a better leader, the kind of leader that Richard Mugisha was speaking about. We also do executive coaching for the likes of you who are on boards, who are CEOs, who are all those interesting positions. So reach out to Fidelis Leadership Institute on all our social media platforms, and we will definitely reach out to you and take you through what you might need. We are faithful, available, and teachable. That's what we believe in, and we always believe in. We will catch you again next Thursday. My name is Lynn Komjisha. Our guest was Mr. Richard Mugisha. I say that with some reservations because, my God, he has my father's name, so I almost said sir, please, sir, but yes, we're glad to have you, and thank you so much. We'll catch you again next Thursday on the same time. Fat Talks, and from me and the team at Fidelis and at Smart 24, and of course for you on Twitter. Thank you so much. Have yourselves a wonderful evening.
Smart 24, driving business.